Welcome to BizBytes, brought to you by Com Together, helping businesses like yours build their brand through telling amazing stories to engage and grow audiences on multiple platforms. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of BizBytes. Now, I have a guest with me that I've got to know over the past year. He's participated in a number of my forums, and we've had a lot of really interesting chats. In fact, we were having such a great conversation, we almost forgot to hit the record button for this episode of the podcast. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce David and allow him to formally introduce himself to the audience.
Thanks, Anthony. It's great to be here, and I really appreciate it. I'm David Deane-Spread. I'm based in Perth. I'm a CEO and executive coach, which I've been doing for the last 25 years. And my business is, you probably hadn't heard of me because my business is by referral only. And that's how I prefer to do it. And it probably also means that I avoid marketing. but it works for me, and I am fully booked anyway, so it's all good. So my background before this wonderful career was military, law enforcement, and another discrete agency where I was really responsible for developing and managing covert operators in fairly difficult situations, as far east as Panama, as far north as Kathmandu, and as far west as Northern Ireland, and far south as Adelaide. But these days, looking for something that was more suitable for raising a family, I got out of all of that, and for the last 25 years, I've been enjoying this, which I discover really is my calling. So there I am.
Yep, absolutely, and I know it's your calling from all the interesting conversations that we've had, and we're going to try and encapsulate some of that. One point I will make is, by the way, that even though you've got a fantastic business, and I know you do, that's based on referrals, by virtue of the fact that you've got referrals means that you are marketing. It's one of the misnomers that many people have, is that marketing has to be something that's paid for and looks like an ad or looks like things that are more physical. But in fact, how we deliver our messages on a day-to-day basis with our clients, our suppliers, our networks in general, is marketing. And if you've got a business like David's that's built on referrals, it's because you are marketing really well. You just may not know it, or have put the head around it to know that that's what you are doing. But David, I did want to touch on particularly initially your background, because it's a fascinating background to get to where you are. So take me back to the early stages. Was the military career the first thing that you wanted to go into?
Yes, it is. Actually, it's a family thing. I am the last of my family generation, which for over 200 years, the eldest son always went into the military, and I was the last of that. I did not encourage my sons to do the same, and they have chosen not to. But I won a Duntrian scholarship, and then elected to go to Portsea instead, which meant that I could concentrate on the military side rather than the academic side.
Yep.
And I ended up in the military police. My last posting in the army was the 2RC of the military police school, the Royal Australian Military Police School. And from there, I was headhunted into the Federal Narcotics Bureau, which is now part of the AFP. And at the same time, I was elected to go. I was offered an opportunity with another agency that only operates offshore, and it's a discrete agency, and we won't go any further than that with that one. But my specialty, both in the military and in the Narcotics Bureau, was really covert operations, and I spent a lot of that time both operationally leading covert teams, but also developing them, training them, getting them to the right standard, and putting them through, issues around surveillance and all of that sort of stuff. The the big part that came out of that, those that every time something went wrong, and it did often because it's a high risk and complex activity, we had to do an investigation to determine what went wrong and how can we prevent it from happening in the future. And the result for all of the investigations was that it was the operator's attitude in the moment that actually was the root cause of the issue, like pilot error, the human thing. And if it wasn't the pilot's error, it would have been an error by somebody in maintenance or even aircraft design, again, a human error.
Yep.
That hadn't been detected. And so I was required then to develop a training program for what is now known as attitudinal competence. And if you Google attitudinal competence now, you'll discover that I'm it. And so I wrote the workbook. I wrote a manual for it for the government, and that's now been adopted and adapted and developed by special forces and other organisations that subscribe to that kind of thinking. And I've adapted it for the business market in a workbook called Master the Power of Your Attitudes. And it is really the foundation of how we want to move forward, no matter what we are doing in our life or work. And that is to have the ability to adapt and adopt your very best attitude for what has happened, what is happening, and what might happen, and not actually deploy habitual attitudes, which perhaps don't work or aren't suitable anymore.
And I find that's an interesting point, because I wanted to come back to you and where you sort of started this and saying that it was going into the military was something that had crossed a number of generations. So how much was that forced upon you, and how hard indeed was that for you to then turn around and break that for your children?
It wasn't too hard, to be truthful, because my behavioural traits are that I like change anyway, and I have to be careful that I don't just change for the sake of change. That there needs to be a good reason for it, and whereas I don't need a good reason to change. But I've got to recognise that that's the case. Most people do need a good reason for changing. So that wasn't too hard for me. I guess it was harder more on my parents when I surrendered my commission in the military and took on basically what was a non-commissioned officer's role in law enforcement, mainly because I was the youngest ever graduate of the Victorian Police Detective Training School. I don't think they've had anyone yet both ducks it and graduate from it at the age of 23. I think I was 22 or 23.
Wow!
And most of my cohort were in their mid to late 30s. And so that was back then, though. But so my parents were disappointed that I surrendered my commission, and I didn't really see. I don't put a lot of value on rank. I put a lot of value on the people in the rank. And do they deserve the rank? Are they behaving in accordance with the rank demands of them? And are they really caring for their people? Are they good leaders? And that's my passion, is about leadership. I mean, I was trained to be a good leader. I've had lots of really good examples and mentors, and I've made my fair share of mistakes as well. But I've also had the experience of bad leaders.
Yep.
And I know what I don't want to be like, and I do know what I do want to be like. And that's what I've strived to do for my entire career. And it's been very rewarding. It's been it's a learning journey. I mean, I'm still learning, even though I've been officially, I suppose, a leader for over 50 years. And I'm still learning. And yes, I might be a slow learner, but heck, there's a lot to learn. In fact, I think, unless you've led every single person on the planet, you've still got something to learn because everyone's different.
Absolutely. I think that learning is a constant thing, and you never get to the end of it. I love kind of the work that you've done around attitude and around the differentiation and that human element to it. And I guess, as I said, it probably, even though you may not have found it difficult because that's who you are, I can imagine that idea of, your father did it, your grandfather did it, his father did it, et cetera, and to get to that point where you're going, well, okay, that's what I've got to do, and then as you say, pull the pin, but not only pull the pin and say actively discourage your sons from doing the same. It's
so I didn't. I probably didn't message that correctly. I didn't actively discourage them. I just didn't encourage them.
Yep.
When they asked me what should I do, and there's really, I had two sons. My eldest son passed away. He never could have been in the military because of his illness. He had a congenital issue, and he was meant to die by the time he was 21, but he passed when he was 29. So it wasn't my eldest son, it was my younger son, James, who did actually did have a go at being in the army, and but he had broken his back in a motorbike accident, and he wasn't they didn't accept him medically.
Yeah.
But he's all right. He's not injured now. But I didn't encourage them. Put it that way.
And it is an interesting idea, isn't it? That encourage versus discourage, because there certainly was a time in our I guess our parents' generation and before that, where there was this active encouragement to go down particular career paths.
Yeah, and look, I learned actually, to be fair to my parents, it was my mother primarily who encouraged me to go for the Duntroon Scholarship, and then army. And she was an army, army file, I guess they call it. But Dad said, "Son, you do whatever you want to do. Just be the best at it."
Yep.
That was his encouragement, and Mum was the one that mainly did it. One of my English teachers at school wanted me to be a journalist, and I did have that. I mean, because I do like writing, but I also preferred soldiering, so I did that.
Yeah, and looking but it's interesting as well that those kinds of ideas have obviously shaped what you've gone on to do as well. And I think, you've gone through, and you talk about, leadership, and that idea that some people are thrust into leadership and they're not really good at it. Others naturally become leaders. And I think that, it is about, as you say, about attitude. And I think that's obviously that you've literally written the manual on it, but it's come from that background, hasn't it? It's come from that idea of how you were brought up and that career path that you've had, and observing that human element in what is a very, particularly in the military, is such a systemized approach to things. And that human element is what can easily be forgotten, but obviously is critical.
Yes, and look, I wouldn't like to just say just because I've been in the military, I've become a good leader. I don't, because you can go into the military. There's plenty of bad leaders in the military, let me tell you, but there's plenty of good leaders as well, and that's the same wherever we are. It doesn't matter whether you're in the defence or IT or mining or whatever. There are good leaders and better leaders and worse leaders. And a lot of that has to do with the quality of training you get and development you get, and your own personal attitude towards it. I mean, if you choose to be a leader because you like the perks and the status and the separateness, then hand in your badge. That's what I say. But being a leader actually is about serving other people, and and looking after them and helping them to be great.
Mm.
And you know, I certainly, I mean, I learned very quickly that it's a team effort.
Mm.
And I was very fortunate. I had when I was a young officer, I had some very good sergeants and warrant officers who gave me the right advice and wouldn't let me fall down the wrong path of, you know, the arrogant young officer who thinks that knowledge is better than experience. When you need them both.
It's interesting, isn't it, really, because it's and this was even, I think it has been the case for about the last 10, 15 years at least, where there's the younger generations have felt this need to move up the ladder quite quickly. And so there's been this idea that they don't stay in jobs for too long unless they're being moved up. And so it's kind of, and I've been worked previously in organizations where you've found yourself in a situation where people have moved up the ladder far too quickly and they're not really qualified to be there. They've somehow been allowed to bounce from one to the other because, as you say, they might have some knowledge, but experience is so critical. You know, it just, and I imagine, again, this is something you get out of the military as well. They can tell you all the rules and regulations of what to do and how to do things, but experience tells you something different and how you actually respond. And experience enables you to respond quickly in a way that you know is going to work.
Yes, there's no doubt about it. Look, you know, and I understand young people who've finished training or university, they're graduates. They do have a lot of knowledge. There's no doubt about that, and knowledge is very, very useful. It's not, knowledge is not power. Shared knowledge is power, but experience is required as well. And there is a study, and it's a little bit dated now, but they said that if you've been out of university for 10 years and you're now working alongside a person who's in the same role, and that person's been in the role for 10 years, your knowledge and your capability and your experience are now, you're now equal.
Mm.
All right. So, you know, knowledge and experience are required together.
Yep.
However, I'll take experience over knowledge any day of the week.
Yes.
And it does what and I'm probably going to lose some friends over this, but I am horrified at the number of people that put themselves up as leadership experts and they've never been in a leadership role.
Yes.
And that I find that I understand their passion because and most of these people have been subjected to bad leadership, which said, well, I'm going to make a change. And I applaud that. But it's, you know, until you've had to make those hard calls on your own and made mistakes, which is how you mainly learn.
Absolutely.
Then you've got there's a cap on how much you can help another person.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah. It's really interesting you say that because I remember, you know, I've had my business now for over 12 years. But I remember back, or probably dating back nearly close to 20 years ago, that I was working for an organization and I had a very good relationship with the CEO. And we were having a casual conversation. And I said, look, I'm getting to the point where I think I'm going to go out on my own. And he said to me, you're not ready yet. You need a little bit more experience. And, you know, that was a summation of a longer conversation, but I took his advice and I'm really glad I did. You know, it's a bit like your teenagers and the teenagers to about 25, right? They think they know everything. And once you get to about 26 to 30, you suddenly realize you don't know anything. And I think that's one of those hard faces and I think that's true about your working life as well. There's a point where you think you know it all and you really don't. And the experience is so critical. You can relate to, and you and I have spoken on many occasions, but I'm that I'm such a big believer in storytelling, and it's part of the reason for the love of this particular podcast is that ability to hear and tell stories, and it's what people will remember. And I just stories enable you to respond to different circumstances. It is that human element, and we were having a conversation prior to the recording of this podcast that we're going to sort of touch on a little bit now in relation to AI and how that's come into the fray and how it's eliminating, how people are forgetting about that human element, that certain AI does some great things to an extent, but it removes that human element. And I think it's that storytelling element, which is an experience where it all marries together, because you can tell me about there's a situation and you could tell me the rules of what to do in that situation, but it's your ability to pluck stories out of your own experience that makes what those rules are so much more relatable and more and enables you to teach that better to the next and be a leader. I think that's what's critical about it.
Yeah, look, I was having a fantastic conversation. I arrived at an appointment early the other day, and so I decided to have a conversation with ChatGPT-4.
Fascinating, isn't it?
It is. And I asked it a couple of questions. First of all, the first question I asked it, I said, give me the latest Australian case law on larceny as a servant, and then provide also the source. And then it gave me a long-winded explanation of why it couldn't do that, and wouldn't do that, and then referred me to the sources where I knew they existed anyway.
Yeah.
So I saw that as an interesting limitation, and it would have given some solicitors some quiet confidence, relief.
Yes.
At the moment, it can't do that.
well, I mean, I think I think the interesting thing is you can't do it with ChatGPT, but there is actually one for lawyers. But interestingly enough, been in development for a number of years. And I had something to do with them a few years ago. They go by the abbreviation of OSLI, and anyone in the legal profession will no doubt know of them. And they've developed some versions of their own AIs, which has been fascinating because they've built it on the basis of trying to help people, particularly in remote areas, who may not have access to the specialized legal knowledge that gives them some framework to build some things from, and they're constantly feeding it the latest and greatest. But you're right about ChatGPT. I mean, I'm trying to plan something on the weekend for coming up in the future, and I'd nominated some dates, and interestingly enough, and even specified it was 2023 when this is happening. But the days of the week that it assigned to it, and particular events that are happening, that are locked-in events, public holidays and the like, it actually, I don't know what year it was operating on, but it wasn't operating on 2023. And I had to keep insisting to it that it was
2021.
Wrong.
Well, the
possibly
ChatGPT-4
is
is only current up to September 2021.
Yeah, but it's interesting when you actually tell it, say, for 2023, and it's not doing that. And I think it's more to the point of that it's not. It's far from being perfect at this point. It's a great guide, and it's doing. I
did ask it a question about. I said, "Can you dream?" And it gave me, and it said, "No, I can't. I can't." It said, "AI can't dream, nor does it have emotions. We only operate off algorithms and database." And that's, and there you go. That's beautifully said. That's all it is.
Well, David, I share with you this that and for people who have keenly followed me in on LinkedIn for a little while will know this. So a little while ago, I decided I was going to interview an AI. So what I did was used one of the free tools to create a character, a humanized looking character. and then I fed it a script. I then recorded myself asking questions to that script and presented it as an interview with an AI. And there were two things that were interesting out of that. So one, I did ask the question at the end, can you tell me a story? And of course, knowing full well that it could only tell what I had actually told it to say. So of course, it can't really tell a story. But what I found really fascinating was that clearly in some of the comments that were made on that particular post were actually made by people utilizing an AI for those comments, because I know some of those people well enough to know that it wasn't them. And so I found this whole idea of, here I was presenting this whole idea of an AI can't be everything and it's not human. And we were getting sort of non-human responses, kind of going, well, who's benefiting out of that idea? I think it's fascinating.
I wonder why you do that. Like say comments in LinkedIn posts. You're not doing it. AI is doing it. You're probably not even looking at it or paying attention to it. All you're doing is apparently appearing, and that's apart from it being inauthentic. What's the point?
Well, I'm a big believer in putting a lot of video on LinkedIn, and there's a reason for that. It's because when you're seeing someone speak, it's authentic. And it's not being mocked up, and particularly you can tell when it's not scripted. What I find really interesting is that often when you post a video on LinkedIn, there is a bit of a blurb that people are putting beforehand. And what I found was that I wouldn't say nobody was watching the video, because the stats tell me that people were watching the video, but many of the people who commented clearly had not watched the video, because there was one particular post recently where I think there were 10 or 12 comments that were based on the last line of the blurb that I'd put in and were almost identical to one another. And I sort of went, well, what's the point of that? Watch the video and say something in there. So I'm actually so again, those of you paying attention that are looking at some of my posts, I encourage you to watch the video. In fact, I've even trialed a couple of posts where I'm saying I'm not going to say very much, watch the video, which I know is actually going to annoy some people because they're going to not want to watch the video. But I think that's it is an interesting area, that whole human element and that area that you delve into. It kind of it's coming to its fore right now, really, because that experience that you had in the military and the police services and the like afterwards is very much about how that human element interacts with a very systemized and regimented way of doing things, which is exactly what AI is.
It is, and I can see that. However, the human side is crucial. It won't be long before we'll have RoboCop and Robo Soldier. Universal Soldier idea, and so it's not going to be far. It's not far away. Nevertheless, we're going to need humans badly. And the humans need the main skill humans need to acquire now is the basically people skills, the ability to relate, to empathize, to effectively lead, which to me, effective leadership is around influencing, persuading, championing, supporting, coaching, people to be the very best they can be towards a shared vision using the shared values on the one hand, and on the other hand, to be able to respectfully deal effectively with unacceptable behavior and performance such that you maintain trust and respect. Those are the skills that are needed right now, and they've always been needed, but they're needed more now.
David,
and that's where my energy goes.
And David, I know we could continue this conversation for probably another few hours without too much drama whatsoever. But I wanted to wrap up the podcast with just a question for you in relation to your clients. Is there an aha moment that you think commonly clients have that you wish perhaps that some of them would realize a little bit, people would realize now, and they'd line up to be your clients right now? Is there an aha moment that you tend to find that people have when they start working with you after a period?
It's really about to lead requires you to be human. And to lead requires, when you realize that you can be vulnerable, you can make mistakes, you don't have to know everything, and that you can ask and listen and discover that you'll be respected and trusted because of that. When they get that, instead of having to have all the answers, having to be there, the expert in everything, when you realize that leadership is not about that, that's an aha moment. And then when the leader then realizes what they would really like is, how do I then deploy those skills so that I can be effective and earn the trust and respect of my people by being an ordinary human just trying their best. When they realize that that's achievable, and they don't have to learn complex stuff and become invincible, that's when everything starts to really move forward for them.
Fantastic. David, again, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think it's a very powerful story and a fascinating one. And it only takes listening to you for a little while to know why you have such a strong referral network and why you're so heavily booked out. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the input that you give to the forum that I run on a regular basis as well. And I look forward to having you join me in those in the coming up, and other people joining along as well. You only need to message, if you're listening to the podcast and you want to know about the forum, then just message me and we'll fill you in on the details. But David, thank you so much for being a great guest on BizBytes.
Thank you, Anthony. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thanks a lot.
BizBytes is brought to you by ComTogether for all your marketing needs so you can build your brand, engage audiences on multiple platforms. Go to comtogether.com.au, follow the links to book an appointment for a free consultation.